All right. So, which one did you want to go ahead and start with? Did you want to go with the diseases first?
Yeah, let's do diseases first.
Okay. So, with AFib and VFib, let's go ahead and just clear this up a little bit. So, here's a heart. AFib is when the atria is firing off, and all the muscles in the atria are squeezing, but they're doing it at different times.
Yes.
And so basically they can't move any extra blood. Thankfully, most of the blood is moved by gravity, and so it's okay unless you're going to exercise, because then you need the atria to move the blood faster than gravity will do it.
Yes.
Because you have a demand on the body. So then AFib, or atrial fibrillation, is going to have effects when you're like exercising or something like that. So AFib, not deadly, just means the muscles of the atria can't work at the same time. And there are little bits of them are working at any given time. So it's like this bit's going right now, and then a moment later it relaxes and this bit goes, and then it relaxes and this bit goes. And so they aren't working together.
They're multiple pacemakers.
And that's fibrillation, is when it doesn't work together. Now VFib is the same thing, but in the ventricle. And even though, and so we said AFib isn't a big deal, this one is a big deal.
Right.
Even though it's the same thing as AFib, the ventricles are supplying the whole body. And so if the body can't get blood, that includes the brain and, you know, all of your organs and everything. And so if your ventricles...
That's lethal.
Right, that's lethal. And so usually when you have a heart attack, it's not the MI itself that kills you, it's the fibrillation that comes after that. And then that's part of the heart attack. So that's VFib. Now, the last one that you mentioned you wanted to hit was AV block. And actually, before we do AV block, do both of these make sense?
Yes.
Okay. AV block. Now, if we have a node in the right atria called the sinoatrial node, which we do, and then we have the AV, or atrioventricular node, and we talked about these before, usually the SA node sends a signal to the atria and to the AV node. And then the AV node slowly sends it down to the ventricles. As soon as by the time it gets down there, the atria have finished squeezing blood out into the ventricles, and then that's when this signal will finally arrive at the bottom tips of the ventricles, and then they get to squeeze to move the blood. So that's what usually happens is fire it to the atria, slowly share it to the ventricles, atria are done, ventricles get to go. All part of the same signal. So, however, if the nerve, for lack of a better term, between the sinoatrial node and the AV node is broken, or blocked, that's what we call AV block. SA node can't get to the AV node because it's blocked between there. We call it AV block. SA node can still talk to the atria. And the atria will go at the pace the SA node sets. And the pacemaker cell, SA node, pacemaker speed is going to be between 60 to 100 beats a minute. The AV node will sit there waiting for a signal.
Right.
If the AV node didn't have like any ability to fire itself off, then this would kill us because the ventricles would never go off. Thankfully, the AV node does have its own pacemaker signal, but it goes much slower. It goes at 40 beats a minute.
Right.
So while the atria are going, I'm just going to average it to 80 beats a minute, the ventricles are only going half of that. And so we get 2 atrial beats for every 1 ventricular beat, and they're not timed with each other. And so that's what you call AV block. At least the ventricles are firing off, so it's not as deadly as VFib, because you are moving blood, but
at a slower rate.
At a slower rate and not synchronized with the atria. So the atria might be trying to fill the ventricles up. At the same time, the ventricles are already squeezing and trying to move blood out. And so you might have them fighting each other every now and then. That's really kind of rough on the atria.
Okay, sounds good.
So those are the 3 diseases. AV block is SA can't talk to AV. And so you get 2 atrial beats for every 1 ventricular beat, a 2-to-1 ratio, which, as we talked about earlier, atrial beats on an ECG are the P wave,
Okay.
and ventricular beats are the QRS.
Okay.
And so you'd have 2 P waves for every 1 QRS. So you'd go P wave, nothing, P wave, QRS, T, P wave, nothing, P wave, QRS, T, and it's 2 P waves for every 1 QRS.
That's in the
AV block.
Okay.
And then the other ones, for what they would look like, going back to the fibrillation, atrial fib, AFib, and VFib, they would just look like this, jiggity, 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 jiggity. And for AFib, you'd have a jiggity. The QRS is normal because the ventricles are going fine, except that they'll be jiggity because the atria are going at the same time, and you will have no P wave.
Okay, no P wave.
Whereas this one, you'll have the atria are working normal, so you'll have a P wave, but the ventricles will be going jiggity, 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 and so you're going to have that going on all the time, and you won't see the ventricular QRS or T. You might see a little bit of the atria repolarization that's part of the QRS, but most of it will be gone.
Okay. All right.
And then that's what we have time for today.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and post this up so you can look at it.
Okay.
And
You'll be able to put just 1 or 2 words about the cardiac cycle on it?
Cardiac cycle? Sure. Let's go ahead and go through that once. Okay, so cardiac cycle. You have, let's just talk about the left side. If you have, imagine the left ventricle, as it opens up a lot, the atria can dump blood into it. The mitral valve is open. And then once it gets all the way full, atria squeezes the last little bits in, which makes it bulge out a little bit. Then it starts to squeeze, which will slam the door of the mitral valve closed. Try and see that in your mind. Goes ahead and closes. Keep squeezing. Can't open the aortic valve yet. Keep squeezing. Still trying to open that aortic valve. Pop. It finally opens. You squirt out a ton of blood. And then you stop more. And then you're running out of stuff to squirt. So it gets weaker. And the pressure in the rest of the body gets higher than the amount that you're squirting. And so it comes back and slams the aortic valve closed. And then you start, your ventricle starts relaxing, but it still has some pressure left. As we see over here, ventricle still somewhat squeezed. And so it's this dotted line right here where it's still squeezed. And that's enough to keep this guy closed, the mitral valve. And then it relaxes more, but it's still squeezing enough to keep this closed until it relaxes all the way. And then that door, when it's relaxed all the way, the door can fall back open. And so try to see the way it's like, feel the pressure in the ventricle, and it's like pop, opens it, and then slams closed, and then relaxes, pops open, starts squeezing, slams closed. Just try and see open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close. For the mitral and the aortic. And once it makes sense, you'll be able to remember which ones make lub and dub, because slam and close make sounds. You'll be able to know what a systolic murmur should mean, because during systole, you'll know which valves are opening during squeezing, because you can see it. And that's always been helpful. That way you don't have to memorize as much.
Sounds good.
So, awesome. Catch you guys later. And in case you guys couldn't see what we were pointing at, there's that. And then over here, AV block, and then AFib, VFib, and the ECG. So that's what we got time for. Cheers.
Thank you.
No worries. All right.